Finally back to it. So we're going to focus on the neck today. I've got the heel block glued, and again, wanted to make sure that these faces are flush because this is what's going to be joined to the body. Wanted to make sure that this is parallel to the surface of the neck so that it's easier to shape the heel cap on the back of the body to the heel cap on the neck. And we wanted to make sure these lines run parallel and there's continuity between them. So that's all glued up, that's good. So the reason I had to glue this first before I do anything else to the neck is because now I've got to cut the contours. And so I leave about 1/2 inch for the headstock. The volute goes out as far as I can. I try to get as much wood as I can into that volute because I'll shape it by hand, and so more is better. The neck at the first fret needs to be about 0.9 inches, and so I give myself a little bit of space. So I'll start the cut here and then run that contour down here. This is about 1 1/8 inches, and I'll be able to cut out the the heel curve right here, which is going to happen around the 16th fret. Now once I have this contour cut out, the reason I cut that first is so that you've got a flat surface to cut on the bandsaw with. Once I cut that out, I'll take this over to my router table, flip it over, and I'll use a flush trim bit router to take this part of the neck off, this excess. So then we'll be left with just the fretboard and a roughed out neck. That way I can fit it more precisely to the body. So when this fits into the body, all of these angles have to meet each other and fit. The fit's pretty good, now, but it's gonna need a little more work. And so I fine-tune that with a really sharp chisel. I'll probably use some small hand tools. You just go at it little by little until there's no gaps. And if there are gaps, you can always fill them with wood shavings, stuff like this. And I don't think we'll have to do that. Once you add some water to it, we can pop, swell the grains. We'll see how it goes. But right now I need to free the neck so that then we can get on to adding some wings to our headstock. We can cut out the headstock and we can start shaping the fretboard radius. And we're going to do a 12-inch radius on this. But I've got to take it, I've got to make sure I have a flat surface to use on the table router before I put a curve on it. I put a curve on one before, put it on the table router and pivoted and almost ruined an entire neck. So these steps have to be, they're specific in their order. And there's ways to go around it, but this is just the method that I prefer. So once I cut this out, we'll go to the router table, and then we could actually get down to putting the radius on this thing once it's free. I'm curious to see how this maple shows up, once I get it down to about 1,000 grit. So that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to cut this thing out. Again, I want to cut on this side of the line. You don't want to cut on the money end, because invariably something's going to happen. You want to make sure that you've got parallel to your saw blade, so perpendicular to the face, the table. Because if you start to curve it in here, that's when you're going to cut off more on this end than you mean to, and you run into problems. So it's best to just take it easy, and just make sure you're cutting what you want to cut. So here's my, table router with a flush trim bit. So this bearing is going to ensure that this blade cuts according to our fretboard. So I've got the bearing set up so that it meets right there, and it's going to follow this fretboard binding as a guide. And we'll just slowly take a few passes and clean off all of this material until we get to just, fretboard. At that point, the neck will be really close to being done, but more importantly, I can start putting a radius on this and get to fretting it. And once we remove this material, I'll be able to more accurately and cleanly attach this to the body, because I'll know exactly how wide the cap needs to be, and we can make a bunch of other measurements. And removing this material makes cutting the underside of this and shaping the neck contour much easier. Now that we've got a rough idea of the thickness, I'll be able to shape everything else by hand. So let's cut this thing out. So we got the neck roughly cut out. I still need to clean up. I don't like to play too dirty, so I'm going to just cut these off with some hand saws. It gives me a pretty good idea of where these lines need to match. You can see this is exactly where we're going to want the body to meet at this seam right here. And so I can get rid of this material, which means I'm going to actually reshape this horn, the cutout in this horn. Same here too. And it gives us an idea of what our heel cap's going to look like. So it's going to probably look something like that, and then I'll actually cut in this contour right here so that when you reach under, you'll be able to reach these high register frets, no problem. You'll probably be able to play on the soap bar pickup, to be honest. Looks good. Seems to fit pretty well. So let's get to, I'm going to start cleaning up this area right here. I need to get rid of some material so that I can really get down in here, because you see there's little gaps, and we don't want any gaps. Yeah, that's probably easier to see. So I don't know. But before I do all of that, to be honest, I want to put a radius on this fretboard. I'm really curious to see how these epoxy dots held up. So the way we do that is I have a 12-inch radius sanding block. So it's got a 12-inch radius. And I'll usually put, a piece of this Velcro, these sanding pads that I have on there, and then just slowly start to cut in this radius. And it only takes about 20 minutes, and just sand it until this center line starts to disappear. Once my center line starts to disappear, I know that I don't want to go any deeper than what's considered 0 right now. So I'll go negative a little bit on the sides. And it's just, it's maybe a millimeter, 2 millimeters. So I mean, it's not a whole lot, but the curve really makes a difference once you put it on. And I'll try to emphasize a curve on the treble side. Again, I like my fretboards to curve so that when you reach, you're not reaching over, you're reaching under. And that's the way a lot of violins are made, is their fretboards are on an angle, so you don't have to get around to it. So let me put this radius on there, and we will see how those fret dots turned out. So as I'm sanding in the radius on this thing, notice that the epoxy in a few of these holes, it didn't expand the way I wanted. So I just need to add a little epoxy so that when I come back and sand, they'll be flush. There's a few on here that are perfect. Like this guy. See, it still needs to sand inside of here because I've got the radius cut about there and about there. And see how I still have this line left? But once it's all done, it's going to look really nice. This fretboard has a pretty unique grain pattern. It goes like this. So we put some epoxy in these holes, put this on hold.